So welcome everybody to our Fall Assessment Day 2023. This is a wonderful session called Strengthening Assessment with Plan, Do, Study, Act, which is our general model for how to go through the steps to create an effective assessment and intervention and reassessment. If you are just joining us for the first time today, here is how Assessment Day works. Here's how you're going to have a stronger assessment day. You are going to do your workout. You're going to attend one or more of our Fall Assessment Day events. Then you are going to relax on your yoga mat and you're going to reflect and maybe do some meditation around what you've learned. And ultimately, you will complete the Assessment Day participation form that will allow you to share what you've learned, give us some feedback, and earn your participation certificate. And then if you really want to sort of refresh and reinvigorate, you can go to our Padlet, where you have the opportunity to share about your stronger assessment so that you can earn either a holographic sticker or a magnet designed by our very own Karen Bird. So this is if you really want to level it up and have an even stronger assessment day. Now, in this session, just to sort of set this up, this is going to be an assessment developer conversation around Plan, Do, Study, Act. So Brandon is here, and Brandon, as a little bit of background, is an assessment developer with expertise in the Plan, Do, Study, Act model and assessment. And then here's Julie. Julie is a faculty member, and she's been tasked with running her Psych 101 course assessment. And she has sought out Brandon for help in doing this work because she's not exactly sure where to start, how to go, whatever else. And she needs that support. And she knows that people like Brandon and other assessment developers are available to help her do this work. So on that note, we are going to begin, and I'm going to say, hello, Brandon. Help. What do I do?
Well, hi, Julie, and welcome everyone to this session. We're going to have a little extemporaneous conversation here. So hopefully you'll find some value in the dialogue that transpires in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So Julie, thanks for reaching out. It is really gratifying when people use the ADAPT form and tap into our Assessment Developer Assistance program. And this is what we're here for, to help begin initiating the conversation around your department's assessment activities. And in that conversation, hopefully we'll provide you with some ideas or direction with respect to next steps so that you can have a successful journey with your department around your Psych 101 Common Assessment. So towards that end, the first thing I want to ask you is how familiar are you with our Plan, Do, Study, Act model?
Well, I've heard about it, and I have been trying to read the Tuesday tidbits where it talks about it, but honestly, I feel a little overwhelmed by all of that information. And so I kind of have an idea of what I'm supposed to do, but it seems like a lot, and I'm not really sure where to start.
Okay, so towards that end, then I think what we're going to do is we're going to focus a lot on the planning stage here, because if a lot of quality thought and attention goes into the planning stage, the subsequent stages become much more easy to execute, and you'll have clarity about the type of activity you're going to do throughout the life cycle here. So part of the planning process focuses on identifying your study question. But before we get to the study question issue, I want to move to another element of the planning phase, and that is identifying your stakeholders and who are your conversation partners in this process. Because you are in charge of the assessment strategy for a large course with lots of offered sections, you probably need to be in dialogue with a lot of your colleagues around this. So tell me a little bit about the charge that's been given to you and what your decision-making capacity is going to be.
So as the course lead for Psych 101, I've been kind of asked to lead the work. I don't know that I need to make all the decisions myself, and I don't think my colleagues would want me to make all the decisions. I do think, we have a lot of full-time faculty who teach this class. We also have a lot of adjunct faculty. So I think our full-time faculty are more likely to want to be involved in the conversations. It might be easier for me to have conversations with them. I think our adjunct faculty, some of them may want to be involved, but others might just want to be like, hey, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Okay.
So I guess I kind of view it as, I need to sort of coordinate this process and maybe come up with ideas and suggestions. And then I go to the faculty and ask who wants to be involved, and learn a little bit more about, do they, how active do they want to be in that process? Do they kind of just want to refine it, or do they want to help me build it? It's possible that I can maybe recruit a couple extra faculty to help do a lot of the design work. I'm just not totally sure at this point.
So I think it's because this class impacts so many students, and the work that you do can have a really meaningful impact on student learning because of the number of sections involved. I think it's really important to define your working group for this process. And I would really lean here on your department assessment coordinator to even perhaps like co-chair a small working group where you put out an announcement regarding interest. Maybe you do that at a department meeting. I think it's important to be transparent in the process from step A all the way to execution at the end of the alphabet here, so that everyone feels like they had an opportunity to follow the work and provide some input into that. So yeah, I think getting this notion of who your conversation partners are and mapping that out is really important in terms of facilitating a frictionless process and get buy-in from all of your faculty so that they're willing to participate with you. All right, so great. Now we're going to move on to this question of how are you going to identify the area of student learning that you would like to see some improvement in? And right now at GCC, we are emphasizing strong assessment or stronger assessment. And stronger assessment for us is not simply about verifying student learning that we already suspect is happening. We want to use evidence and observations and leverage them in such a way that we identify areas where actual meaningful learning improvement may be possible, and then developing structures around that to demonstrate that that learning improvement has occurred. So that is the stronger aspect of stronger assessment. So what has the Psych department done in the past with respect to common assessment for Psych 101? And what is the sort of general feeling about its strengths and weaknesses?
So what we've done is, under some of our department assessment coordinators, we've really tried to link the work we're doing at the course level with the work at the institutional level. And so we've thought a lot about, what type of institutional learning outcomes might relate. And what we tend to do is we tend to score things twice. We kind of score it from a course perspective, where are students in terms of meeting this outcome for the course, and then we also score it kind of from that institutional learning outcome perspective. So that's kind of the way it's been set up within our department, and it's nice. We do all of that through Canvas. We pull in a course, kind of the course outcome and the institutional outcome. Right now, our competencies in Psych 101 are largely content-based, things like, does a student understand memory and psychological disorders and all of that. And while we have kind of valued that content, what we've talked about also in the past is that what's really important to us as students leave our classes is, can they critically think about like psychological research in general? Mm-hmm. We know that students have a lot of misconceptions around various areas of psychology, like psychological disorders is a big one. And so a lot of what we kind of want to do is both myth busting in the class, but also we want to make sure that when they leave, they can come across information and think about it in a way that leads them to kind of doing that critical thinking process outside of the structured environment of the classroom. So when we did this work last time, we had them engage in a little critical thinking type of reflection activity where we specifically did it related to psychological disorders. And we asked them to identify a misunderstanding they had had, what information they had learned that kind of corrected that misunderstanding, and how they thought they might use that in the future. But we did run into some problems. So we found that this happened at the end of the semester. We had a lot of students not submitting because, they didn't need that assignment by the end of the semester. So there were some kind of problems with the data. And then there was they weren't understanding the instructions as well. So the first time we did this, a lot of the emphasis really was on trying to put together a good assessment and a good assignment to assess, and then thinking through how we were scoring it to try to be kind of even in scoring.
Mhm.
But I think what we didn't get to, which is sort of what you were talking about, is we really didn't look at how can we, what can we do in the classroom that might improve this? So, our students are we really teaching critical thinking in a way that helps them meet this goal? I'm not sure that this first process really looked at that. So that's kind of that's like the big goal here. And it feels kind of hard and complicated and messy.
Right. So a couple observations here. First off, you are not starting from scratch by any stretch of the imagination. You've already identified a really key element of what strong assessment is, and that is we want to take assessment beyond just examining the acquisition of knowledge in courses. When we take a more competency-based approach and think about what we want students to do with that knowledge outside of the classroom or transferring it to other courses in a program, those are the higher order skills that can be deeply impactful. So when we can align acquisition of knowledge with these broader skill sets, you're going to get evidence of a much stronger learning profile out of that. So you're already doing something that I think is really powerful in your department. Now, in terms of taking that general concept, like the myth busting concept, and making it perhaps more productive, one thing that often works in successful assessment environments is making sure that the assessment is iterative. And by that, I mean socializing students early on in the semester that this is, in fact, is what the overall outcomes of the course are intended to be. It's not just that you're going to learn about, theories of motivation, memory, sensation, perception, psychological disorders, the general survey stuff, but accumulatively having this knowledge. What do we want you to do with it? What do we want you to understand? Or how do we want you to perceive things differently? And I'm wondering if it would be possible to turn that common assessment that you have now and scale it down in such a way that it can be iterative throughout the course in terms of major content units, where certain types of myths or certain types of dispositions you're trying to engender can be examined and data gathered at various points throughout the semester, instead of kind of doing a more broad-based assessment at the end of the semester, where you may have issues of student recidivism, people not taking the assessment because it doesn't impact their grade or whatnot. So turning it into a more micro-formative assessment throughout the duration of the semester might be one way of acclimating and socializing students to the process and reinforcing your competencies at the same time. Not the stated competencies, but the idea of the competencies that you want your students to have coming out at the end of the semester. So that's one suggestion there.
Yeah. So I think here's maybe a little bit of a challenge with that. So when we ran into this problem of not a lot of people doing it at the end of the semester, the next time around, we moved it earlier.
Okay.
And we sort of opened it up to, you can talk about any problem that you might be, or any misunderstanding you had. And we just said, and I think we even said, like, any of these chapters cover anything. So it was much broader. And that actually was sort of interesting, looking at what they chose to pick from. And I think we even said something like, do it between week 5 and maybe week 7. We gave kind of a time frame.
Okay.
There were a few of us who then actually kept the original one at the end of the semester. So we kind of did the midpoint one and the end one, although for our official purposes, we just did that midpoint assessment. And we did find that we had some higher participation at that point, although of course students had been exposed to a little bit less. So I think where we might run into some trouble here is, faculty have built their courses and have all of their assignments structured out. And one of the things we're trying to avoid is asking faculty to change their courses in too significant of a way in order to include this assignment. So I think I like the idea, like I could see, maybe in my course, if this was my personal goal, I could scaffold it, I could build it all the way through the semester. But when we're talking about, 30 faculty teaching this class, asking them to do it across, modalities and all sorts of things, I think would be really challenging. So I don't know. Yeah.
That brings up a really good point. But one thing I may suggest here, especially when we're doing common course assessments that involve a large number of faculty members, it's often really useful if we launch kind of like a beta test of the different types of instruments that are being negotiated within the broader discussion group about common assessment for Psych 101. There is an article by Leona Aiken that was done in partnership with the APA, and she talks a little bit about how they do sort of micro-assessment testing across various designated sections of Psych 101 in order to kind of do some pre-evidentiary analysis before trying to promote a larger assessment strategy to the department writ large. And given that we operate on 3-year assessment cycles, that you may have time to kind of grow into that. It doesn't have to be the fully polished form in year 1 of that cycle. So I don't know if that alleviates any of the pressure of kind of nudging in on people's real estate within their classes, but I'm certainly sensitive to that.
Right. Yes. Because you want the good data, you want the buy-in. I mean, I guess what I would be wondering is, are there ways maybe that we can socialize students to this process without requiring in some way that faculty change sort of multiple assignments? Are there maybe, I hadn't really thought, as I'm beginning to think a little bit about like, how do we structure it so that, first of all, I think it's important that we often don't tell students what our learning outcomes are. I typically don't tell students, that a goal of this class is for you to come out being able to do this, and therefore your learning is going to do that. So I think that alone is powerful. And we probably do need to say it repeatedly because students may not think about it. But I'm wondering if there's a way to include some of that conceptually where faculty might be able to build that into, the assignments are already given. Maybe they can provide some of that context, but we can still just be potentially gathering data in one key assignment.
Right. So again, you bring up a variety of good points. First and foremost, good assessment practices almost always involve transparency. And transparency in this context means students need to be along for the ride from point A to point B. They cannot just have an unscaffolded assessment dropped on them without understanding the purpose. And that will skew any sort of evidence that you're able to draw from that particular instrument. So I think there's some very clever ways that you can begin that scaffolding process. If you have at least broad-based departmental commitment to this model, perhaps recording some little micro sessions from leaders in your faculty that can be embedded in Canvas that become part of the curricular flow within a course in which kind of the general setup is articulated for students. So that way adjuncts don't have to go and speak directly to the competencies or create additional space to talk about this. They can play and go, and they have, the chair of the department or the assessment coordinator explaining what the assessment is, why we're doing it, and how it's important in terms of creating habits of mind that we want to see from all of our Psych 101 students. So there is that kind of curriculum building component around the assessment process. It's not just the instrument itself or the concept of the instrument. It's how do you support it through all the scaffolded learning. And that can be hard when you're asking 30, 40, 50 faculty members to all get on board. That's a lot of adjustments. Mm-hmm. So if there's any way to centralize little tiny components of that, that can often be really assistive. CTLE can help with recording and scripts for that sort of thing. Also, we haven't talked about this yet either, is we have a assessment faculty librarian who is fantastic at kind of digging through the available research. And I'm sure a request to, her name's Michelle Petrie, and she's with us today. That's fantastic. So you're getting a 2-for-1 in this developer session. Looking at the literature and seeing what models are out there that have been successful and have developed or presented evidence of student learning in the types of competencies you're interested in. Psych 101 is such a ubiquitously taught course that I'm sure there's going to be plenty of literature that we can examine in terms of kind of formulating suggestions for your broader assessment committee in your department. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation that way. And I can certainly coordinate with Michelle to help curate some of that evidence, and perhaps we can come and co-present to your faculty who are interested in participating in the common assessment activity.
So what I'm hearing is maybe I don't have to figure it all out on my own, because not only can you help me and Michelle can help me, but maybe other people have done something like this and I can maybe use what other people have done.
Absolutely. Our assessment leadership team has been working its way through this book called Assessing Student Learning by Susky. And one of the points she makes over and over and over again is you do not have to reinvent the wheel every single time. You are situated in a community of fellow practitioners, and most of them are pretty generous. So we can certainly support each other in this work and try to make it manageable, scalable. And these are unique issues in your particular department, given the number of faculty and students involved. We want structures that are manageable, so that you can get the data you need to make your argument about what's happening with student learning.
Yeah, so it sounds like it'd be a whole lot easier if I was just doing this with, just for my own class, or maybe with 1 or 2 other people. I think a lot of the complexity here, I feel like we could have probably, maybe made a lot more progress if it was just me designing my own assessment in my own space. So sure. I do appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's how I operate. I'm the only faculty member who teaches a specific course. So I have all the executive functions around that. But you're in a much more collaborative space, a much more impactful space in terms of reach. So that's why I started this conversation about who are your conversation partners. And we need to kind of, maybe we need to also have a conversation with your faculty about their pain points. What are their pain points in terms of instituting the model that was previously done, and gather some sort of qualitative evidence from what their experience was, and then use that to inform in a more systematic way, either revisions to the current tool, or, again, using Michelle to look at some completely different options out there for you. So yeah, you'll be well supported in this process.
And you were talking about like some things we might be able to do differently, like the little videos. Is that part of like the study step where we would then make changes, or is this something we would do at the beginning, or like how would that work?
So it depends on how you are situating the life cycle of this particular approach to Psych 101 assessment. If you are taking your previous data and you've studied it, and here are the problems that you've identified, we can conceptualize the videos as an intervention. So as a way of rescaffolding the assessment so that students are more involved and have a better understanding of what's going on here. So that to me is part of the intervention, and would be kind of at the act stage, okay? Now, if we're using a whole new tool and we're targeting more well-articulated competencies, to me, that is a new assessment initiative. And building those videos would be part of the planning stage. That is where you're making the adjustments to your curriculum to support the assessment instrument that you're going to deploy in your class. So yeah, it really does depends on how you are conceptualizing the life cycle of that particular activity.
Great. All right. So we are nearly out of time for this session, and hopefully what you have been able to kind of enjoy here is a little conversation between, Julie, who needed help with her assessment, and I really do need help with assessment. This was a legit issue, and now I've got all these things in my mind, and I see some of my colleagues here on the call. I'm like, okay, I got to fill out the adapt form. I'm going back to Brandon. And so not just using this as sort of a demonstration of what one of these interactions can look like, but also for me, really thinking through how are we doing Psych 101 assessment next semester. I do think it can be a much more complicated issue when you are managing a larger assessment. So, we were delving into a lot of complicated conversations because of these issues. Know that some of these conversations might be a lot more direct if you are doing something on your own. And I know because we have no session coming up, what I'd really like to do is, Brandon, can you just briefly share your interaction with the faculty member in sculpture, and to talk about like how that as just a very brief example of how something like this type of a collaboration between a faculty member or staff member and an assessment developer could go in another space.
Right, absolutely. So the conversation with the developer is always scaled to the needs of whoever's reaching out. So Julie's case was a more complicated one, for sure. But I recently worked with our ceramicist, and her issue was simply this: I can't get students to center the clay on the wheel. That's it. And that is an issue that impacts students from Ceramics 1 through Ceramics 4. So it has all sorts of impact on her ability to do various competencies in her class. So in conversation with her, it just became clear that the students actually don't get any practice at the wheel because there's limited resources or they're timid. So we went through all of the different objections that students have or the space has in terms of getting students actual practice throwing clay on the center of the wheel. So we developed 5 or 6 techniques that she could use to make sure that students have confidence in that skill and that it's iterative. They do it again and again and again in a low stakes environment until they can consistently complete that task. They're not graded each time, but it's sort of an observational assessment. You keep doing it, and doing it until it's done. And she's now instituted that as a prerequisite for moving on to other assignments. So it was a real simple intervention, kind of like staunching some bleeding here that was occurring because this basic skill set wasn't being demonstrated in class. So, and she's had good success with it over the past semester.
Right. So just so you know, the assessment developers can be supporting you, whether you've got some sort of big project, one that you want to connect with Michelle about, looking at the literature, whether you want to be tweaking something in an individual class. But again, it all goes back to what is it that we really want to ensure students know and can do? How are we identifying that information? How are we implementing that change to ideally create student learning improvement and, of course, stronger assessments? And on that note, we will wrap up this session. Thank you, Brandon, for providing support. I really am going to fill out an adapt form now on our Gaucho site under our assessment developers to get some additional help with this project. And we thank you for coming today. There are 3 links I'm going to throw into chat right now. One just takes you to our full Fall Assessment Day page. One is the participation form that you will complete when you are done with whatever Fall Assessment Day activities you are going to do today. And then, of course, if you want one of our awesome stickers or magnets, there is one other extra little Padlet you can do that you can talk about how you either are going to make some assessment of yours stronger or how you might already have as a model for others. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope to see you at remaining sessions. They continue at 11 12, 1, 2, and then our closeout session at 2:30, where we will hear from 4 different teams talking about their assessment successes. So thank you all for joining, and we will be lurking for a little while if there are any remaining questions, but I will be stopping the recording. So thank you all.